editor of Theos, the Religion and Society think tank. What does anti-racism in practice mean to me? Well, it means three things. It means looking, listening, and learning. So firstly, looking. It's about being aware, being hyper alert to the behaviours and words and structures that oppress people of certain races. It's about listening. It's about not imposing our own thoughts and will on others, but asking questions rather than making assumptions. Assumptions are the enemy of diversity and inclusion. It's also about learning, about recognising that we are not the heroes, nor are we the finished product, that anti-racism is a journey and it's a long game. Now, having looked, listened and learned, it's then time to act. Anti-racism in practice is about not being passive, but being courageous, taking steps outside our comfort zone. Anti-racism in practice looks like discomfort most of the time. We need to get comfortable with that discomfort.
Welcome. Oh, what an absolutely brilliant opening address you had there from Ginny. I think that's probably the award for me. Welcome to episode 5, Anti-Racism in Action, Voluntary Community and Social Enterprise Sector, and how we're going to be taking action against anti-racism. I want to base this episode actually around a lot what Ginny covered there, because I think it was absolutely brilliant. The 3 L's around looking, listening and learning. Communication is obviously key. Asking the questions and not assuming, because I just love that line, that assumption is the enemy to diversity and inclusion. I mean, honestly, it's probably the best opening address. I feel really stirred up. And then how do we take action? And I think at the end, what I think we're going to have to cover as well is getting comfortable with the discomfort. This is a total collaboration between Black FE Leadership Group and FE News. My co-host today is Stella. Stella, I wonder if you could join us in the studio today. Hey, Stella, how are you?
Great, Gavin. How are you? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning. Yeah, really, really good. I think today is a really, really, really interesting episode, and I think in a minute I want to set the scene as we always do. But I think it's interesting for a number of reasons, because there's a lot of things which here we'll see that in the sort of looking at the background is going to be similar sort of narrative to what we've seen in education, in schools like last week, in HE, in FE. It's interesting. And I think also I want to really base today on sort of Chinny's 3 points around how we can look, listen and learn. And I just think that's what the whole basis of this season has been around, hasn't it? Really is around everyone hasn't got all of the answers, but how we can come together as a collective, really. Should I know you've given us some really interesting stats. So I don't know if you want me to sort of run through those sort of quickly, just to set the scene for them, because I didn't realise like 90% of this actually, and it's very, very interesting. There's around 169,000 charities in the UK, and over 80%, that's 136,000, are small, with an income less than £1 million. And many of these charities struggle with attracting trustees. In fact, it's been reported there's 100,000 trustee vacancies in the UK. Akivo, which is the body which looks after the charity leaders and for the voluntary sector as well, and the Institute of Fundraising released a publication called Racial Diversity in the Charity Sector, which had principles and recruitment practices back in 2018. In those heady days when you could like meet people and not wear masks and all this sort of stuff, they highlighted the charity sector as a whole is failing to reflect the racial diversity of individuals, communities, and the geography it serves. When you bear in mind that a lot of what we're going to look at today is going to be around community, that's really interesting. Fewer than 1 in 10 voluntary sector employees, 9%, are from Black, Asian, or minority ethnic groups. And that's a lower proportion than we have in the public and private sectors, which are both at 11%. A lower proportion than in the UK as a whole, which is 14%. Stella, we've seen this so many times in education as well. There's even less racial diversity at executive and non-executive leading levels in charities. Again, Stella, so we've seen in education. Again, it's just alarming that this is just being repeat. Of the largest 500 charities by income, this is an alarming stat. Only 5.3% of people in senior leadership teams were from an ethnic minority background. Even more alarming is from Chinese and other Asian ethno-cultural backgrounds are virtually non-existent, making up just 0.3, that's 0.3% of charity leaders in the largest 100 charities by income. Akivo's Pay Inequalities survey in 2018 found that only 3% of charity CEOs were black, which is even lower than what we're seeing in FE and HE in schools. And respect to boards, the Charity Commission 2017 research into board effectiveness found that 92% of all charity trustees were white. Only 9.6% of trustees in the top 100 charities by income are from a black background. And the Kivo report is highlighted, despite repeated attention being drawn to the issue, figures on racial diversity in the charity sector remained static for a number of years. Again, this is something we've seen in FE, HE, and in schools. And I just think it's really, really interesting that this is we've got this episode today. It's just been repeated, isn't it, Stella? You know, like what we're sort of seeing here across all different elements of.
Exactly, Gavin. But the important thing is that we're all coming together now. To collaborate to shift things. I think that we shouldn't really beat ourselves up about the data. That's the starting point now. Let's see what we can do together. Anti-racism in action, collaboration. Let's see how we can actually tackle this and make a difference. So it's good. It's we're on the move, Gavin. We're moving.
Yeah, and I agree. It's like looking, and then it's going to be this whole part around listening and learning, and then taking action, isn't it? Which is great. Two brilliant guests. We've got Catherine from the Voluntary Action Doncaster. We got Maddie from the National Association for Voluntary and Community Association. I wonder, Catherine and Kath and Maddie, if you could join us in the studio. Hey, Kath. Hey, Maddie. How are you?
Hi, Gavin. How are you? Hi, Stella.
Yeah, really, really good.
Hello.
Stella and Kath, you know each other from a while ago now, don't you? Because I know you was working at BLI. I don't know, Stella, if you wanted to explain that a little bit more.
Yeah, absolutely. Kath was on the steering committee for the Black Leadership Initiative, which was an amazing initiative that won the Queen's award for volunteering way back. And I wonder, Kath, you know, from that work that you did representing the department on the steering committee, your journey, your personal journey out of public sector into the charity sector, and now, you know, Voluntary Action Doncaster, BFELG affiliate. How has this, you know, this whole agenda, this whole movement, how what's your journey been like to still be in this space?
Well, thanks for giving me the opportunity to come and talk to everybody today. I think my journey since leaving the civil service, it's been a bit of a personal journey in terms of finding somewhere where I felt comfortable and a good fit for me at my stage of career. I took up the role as the Chief Executive of Voluntary Action Doncaster almost 2 years ago now. And this was a new organisation, a new infrastructure organisation. So the role of Voluntary Action Doncaster is really to coordinate the work of the community and voluntary groups locally and act as that brokering and advocacy sort of organisation for the sector, representing the interests of the sector with statutory organisations, and also to try and foster meaningful partnerships and collaborations between all the various organisations within the Doncaster area. So coming to this role, I was very early on asked whether Voluntary Action Doncaster would be willing to host the Inclusion and Fairness Forum. And of course, I sort of grabbed it with both hands because that's exactly what we're about, ensuring equity and fairness and making people be nice to people, not making people, but helping people be nice to people. Because that compassion for human beings is essentially what the third sector, what drives the third sector. So hosting the Inclusion and Fairness Forum, we've got a remit which is beyond racism, looking at all the intersectionality of all the diverse issues facing Doncaster communities. But I was aware that we needed to be really clear and taking action specifically around anti-racism. So that's why I reached out to my old friends and colleagues to see what support and how we could work together, because that experience, expertise, and structure is something that we don't have internally. We're a tiny organisation, so that collaboration and drawing on the skills and expertise of colleagues is what we needed.
Great. You mentioned, Kath, an infrastructure organisation. What does that mean?
Infrastructure organisation.
Ordinary people, like.
Thanks for asking that, Stella, because I wanted to know as well. So thank you.
So within the third sector, the makeup of our community and voluntary groups, there are lots of small micro organisations that are really out there in the communities, actively doing what they need to do to support individuals in their area. And the role of an infrastructure organisation is to act as that ears, eyes, and mouthpiece of that sector, so that we can reflect the positives and the pain that those micro organisations are feeling and try and do something about it. So one of the things which is really, really important to us at the moment is around funding and commissioning. So trying to influence the way in which big organisations like the local authorities contract or commission services is quite unwieldy and not fit for purpose for your grassroots organisations. So that advocacy and role there, it's very broad ranging, but that hopefully gives you a bit of an insight to what an infrastructure organisation is about.
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Today's show is actually very timely, because literally just yesterday there was an announcement around the Anti-Racism Alliance. I wonder if I could ask you both, Kath and Maddie. Maddie, maybe if I could bring you in first, because you're so patient with us all. If you could maybe highlight, what that was about and what does that mean?
So as Kath describes, VCS infrastructure is about supporting communities and supporting people to connect their communities and do the stuff that matters most to them. So NAVCA is a national umbrella body for organisations like Kath. We've got 187 members right across England. And we're about equality and community empowerment and putting that empowerment into communities to do the stuff that matters most. And so when Black Lives Matter came around, we took quite a hard look at ourselves and found that we were lacking effectively as a network around how engaged and connected we were with Black communities, around sometimes a lack of trust with Black communities, and that it was too white dominated as a network. So we've been looking at NAVCA ourselves, but also looking at our role as a catalyst within that wider network of support structures and making sure that that is reaching out more widely and having the uncomfortable conversations that you were describing earlier on. So in coming together, we've formed this anti-racist group, which is made up of NAVCA staff and trustees and then members. I wanted to develop a statement of principles that acts as a catalyst to that wider network to come on board. So we've got kind of the 10 or 15 organisations that are at the forefront, but they're at very different stages along their journey. It's again what we were talking about earlier on about that journey from not to ever get there, but trying to get to a better place. And so we want to develop a set of principles that people could sign up to where they're at, which would support, encourage, cajole, be the catalyst to take further action. And so we published that today. And then in the East Midlands, Kath and some colleagues have taken that further to cascade it from the infrastructure organisation to the community groups themselves. So Kath, if you want to pick it up from there with the Alliance.
Yeah, so we don't just work in silos. We try and work across our geographical patch and support each other on issues that are really important. So, for example, I also work very closely with my peers in South Yorkshire on developments around the integrated care system. So that's one. So this work in terms of anti-racism is something where we felt that we needed that collaboration and support, cooperation across the patch. So having issued or having joined the Alliance and got our trustees to sign up and endorse that, we wanted to see how the voice strengthened when you've got more people together. So we definitely felt it was important not just to have the statement, but to show that we're going to act on it, and that public commitment through the press release that we've issued demonstrates the starting point of our action to actually take stuff forward seriously, share our learning, and make sure that we have that peer touch point so we can challenge and support each other on the journey.
Yeah, no, that's really good. Can I ask, the figures we gave earlier at the top of the show were very stark, and it's something we've seen repeated, and we've always sort of delved into it a little bit more in schools, in HE, in FE. Why do you think those figures are reflected in the voluntary sector? And obviously you're doing stuff about it, but maybe to put it into context, you live and breathe it. So is it? I don't know if there's any insights you can share. Maddie, I can see you nodding now. I don't know if there's any insights you can maybe share at all.
Yeah, certainly we know it's an issue. We know the formal sector is very dominated by white people, and certainly for our network of infrastructure organisations, as I said earlier on, we know we need to connect more and connect better with Black-led organisations. And we've seen right across the network that the Black Lives Matter campaign, and indeed the pandemic and the disproportionate impact the pandemic had on communities of colour, has really driven organisations to reach out and build trust and connections and relationships with a wider set of community organisations. So some of the figures you were talking about with charities, the nuances of the world in which we work is that many of the organisations that me and Kath are working with are community organisations that aren't formally structured as a charity. So they're much smaller, and maybe 70% of them have an income not of less than £1 million, but of less than £10,000. So they really are micro. In our world, £1 million is actually quite big. So we've been we've been reaching out and engaging and connecting and doing all of that. Because of the informal nature of lots of the groups they're working with, we haven't got hard numbers about that, but we know we need to do more, which is what this work is about, of trying to do more and trying to do better. And particularly the trustees point, I think, is a really important one, where charities and community organisations are governed by a board of trustees. And we know that the diversity of those trustees isn't good enough, that there are too many white people, too many older people, too many people who are in their 60s. And so attracting younger people, people from different backgrounds to be trustees is really important, because they're the people ultimately who steer charities and community groups, who set the direction, who make decisions about where it's going and what the priorities are. So we're doing some work with Ep5, for example, from Equity Marketplace, to put on some workshops to help our members and their members think about what action they're taking. And we've got one specifically for trustees and thinking about how we diversify trustee boards.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. We've had this time and time again. Yeah, sorry, carry on.
Can I come in there, Gavin? You said, I don't know, I can't recall whether it was you, Maddie, or Kath talked about trust. What do you think is at the root of this lack of trust or absence of trust by Black communities? Because if we can understand what that is, we've got a chance to work with them in the workshops and so on.
Through the work of the Inclusion and Fairness Forum, we have had conversations with a range of minoritised groups, including people of colour. And the common issue throughout those conversations is, do I see myself reflected or comfortable? Well, so that visibility is probably one of our biggest barriers. So how we turn that around is challenging. We're having conversations at the moment through a peer review, actually within Doncaster, in terms of the partner organisations, so the college, the local authority, the chamber, the NHS, etc. And again, this recruitment issue, not only in terms of the leaders, but in various different parts of the organisation, recruitment is a problem, and we need to sort of do some real focused work on looking at where the barriers are. Is it in the advertising, and we're putting the adverts in the right place? Is it the language within the job description? Is that every single bit of the process will need to be dissected and looked at, and hopefully working together we'll be able to improve the process, not just for ourselves, which is pretty key. And by the way, you know, can I advertise that we've got a vacancy on our trustee board? We need a treasurer. So anybody who's interested, get in touch. Yes, I mean, I think it is about being welcoming, being where possible, having that visibility of diversity, but also working together.
I think it's also about structural racism and building trust with communities where it's been lacking in the past, because decisions have been made which have excluded communities and groups and organisations. And I think once you've been excluded or not felt part of something, then you back off. Of course you do. Mm-hmm. So it's about rebuilding years of underinvestment, underinvolvement, and under representation of certain parts of the community. So I think to not acknowledge that and not recognise we need to do more to build it back, I think would be missing part of those difficult conversations that we need to be having. And I think we dismantle some of the structures we put in place and rebuild them in a way which connects better with Black communities.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, thank you guys for being open about that. Stella, it's a really good question. Do you know what I mean? Because it's like the root of how you can sort of address this, really, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Kath, we heard a bit about your journey. Maddie, I wonder if we could hear a bit about your journey, why anti-racism is important to you. I didn't know if you wanted to share a bit, because it was interesting hearing Kath at the top. I didn't want to leave you out, Maddie, as well.
So I've been at NAVCA since, a year almost now, since the middle of March last year. Before that, I was Chief Exec at Voluntary Action Sheffield, so Kath's opposite number in the neighbouring borough. And I suppose our mission and vision was always around equality and thriving communities, community empowerment. But I think I was perhaps a little bit complacent about the importance of the anti-racist nature of that, in that, well, yes, of course we're doing good, so that's okay, isn't it? So when the Black Lives Matter campaign really escalated in the aftermath of the George Floyd killing, and then the disproportionate impact of the pandemic kind of collided in the groups and the networks that I was building from Voluntary Action Sheffield, and it was really apparent both that communities of colour were facing this massive disproportionate impact from COVID and were struggling to be heard, perhaps, which then collided with the Black Lives Matter campaign, setting out the lack of voice, impact, influence, presence that some of those groups had. And so it was by reaching out and talking to people who were leading those organisations and really being challenged by them that made me really appreciate much better the level of change that we needed and how that might come about. And perhaps it was conversations that I'd maybe been avoiding having that really were brought to a head, and then working with some brilliant leaders who helped me on that journey and helped to reconstruct some of the activity we were doing in Sheffield, both in response to COVID, but also to look to, for example, distribute funding more effectively to a wider set of communities. So when I came into NAVCA last March, I kind of brought that with me and could see it replicated across the country in many different places. Again, brilliant leaders doing fantastic work. Some specifically around Black communities. So in Lancashire, there's a network specifically to support Black-led organisations, and other places like with Kath, where it's reconstructing and building the infrastructure for the BCS so that it really is engaging with all communities locally.
Can I? You go first, Gavin.
Go for it, sir.
Okay. I was really interested, Maddie, in the what's happening in Kafka, because looking at your anti-racism group and what it's trying to do, really ambitious to be, for the organisation first, to be anti-racist, and then for the network, facilitating the network. And you formed a steering group. I wonder, can you tell us a bit about where you are now? Because I think that if what you're trying to do could be achieved, even if it's 10 years, 20 years time, that would be amazing. Where are you now? And I know that you sort of started that last year. Where's it going?
So to be honest, I think I feel frustrated that we've not gone as far and as fast as I wanted to. And so we've sort of, I suppose it's like an onion. It's unpeeling an onion. So we started very much internally, I suppose, with some of the easy stuff. So looking at our policies, our systems, our processes, and making sure, as Kath said, that peeling it right back to make sure that they are inclusive and anti-racist. So looking at our recruitment, looking at our systems, looking at, for example, we had our conference last year and making sure that we had a diversity of speakers and perspectives coming to that conference. So starting to looking at how we're working and who we're working with. But then I think the real opportunity is then the network and how we're a catalyst and we can influence that wider network more widely. Hence the anti-racist group that we set up, bringing in members of the network. And they really relate to the points made at the beginning around looking, listening and learning. And we spent a lot of time having really uncomfortable conversations in that network. We spent several meetings talking about words and language because getting that right is so important and so difficult, and we're not there yet. So there's some things I'd say we have made some tangible differences. So going back to our recruitment process, for example, going back to how we're making sure that when we have events that they are diverse, making sure if I use my power more effectively perhaps in making sure that if I'm on a platform that it's not a platform which is uniform in its perspective and view. But then thinking about the network and where we go more widely about it not to be about NAVCA speaking, but about NAVCA amplifying other voices or bringing other people into conversations where they might not have been. Thinking about how we create spaces for other people to have those uncomfortable conversations, which is much as what that network has been about, and supporting other people to come into that space and to think about their own learning. And that's where I think there's the opportunity for greater impact. But also then is where I get a bit frustrated, I suppose, is that there's so much more to do. And the challenge of diverse leadership or communications or events that are absolutely diverse around our own membership and staff, there's still a long way to go with it. So I think this is still very much a starting point, although I hope that we are making some progress both in what we're doing and how we're behaving and how we're engaging with more people, but then also how we're perhaps supporting, cajoling, encouraging other people to also get into that space to make the impact greater.
Yes,
that's really,
like
really
Ginny said, it's a journey, and I would say it's taken us 400, 500 years to get here, so it will take time to, but we hope we can accelerate things into decades. But it's interesting, Gavin, isn't it, that we had the recruitment companies, and we're learning now that a number of organizations are specifying to their search companies we must have a diverse shortlist, which is great. And I read in the CAVCA's your statement of intent or part of your plan that you're saying that you will not sit on platforms that aren't diverse, and that's such a strong statement, really.
Yeah, and for example, recruitment, it's not just happening. It's not just about the policy saying we will be diverse and we'll do blind sifting, but I've made a commitment that's particularly for senior leadership jobs, I'll not have a panel which doesn't include people of colour. But I think it's about how do we develop an organisation that people want to apply to, and that's another bit. I think it's very cultural. And until we've got an organisation that people know about and want to apply to, doesn't matter what we do and systems and processes.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I think there's a couple of themes that come up from previous episodes as well. Governance and having diversity in governance. Also reflection of the community that you're working within as well, that people can see a mirror back and feel inspired to move forward. But guys, our time's nearly gone. I can't believe it. It's shot by. If you could dream and dream big, because it's interesting. The pandemic, what we've gone through, Black Lives Matter, what we've gone through, it's all been around community, particularly from the pandemic. It's been so much more to the forefront, to everyone's view. If you could dream and dream big, what would you want to see in anti-racism in action for you, Kath?
I think for me, although we're an infrastructure organisation and particularly focused in supporting our communities, it's about making sure that we're bringing everybody together on the same journey. So recognising people will be at different stages, and when I say everybody, I mean public sector, private sector, everybody. I think that's the big ambition, that we're not just supporting our own people, but in order to benefit the community, we need to bring everybody along.
Yeah, no, that's cool. Maddie, what would you want to see?
So we talk about our ambition being to do ourselves out of a job, because communities are self-sufficient and thriving. And I think the same is true with being anti-racist. I want to do ourselves out of a job so we don't need to be here anymore having this conversation, because we've done it and we've got equity across communities.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. Stella, what would you want to see?
Gavin, you wouldn't get away with it. You got away with it last week. You didn't. My dream, as ever, is to see people really being comfortable and working together, and just living life together, whether it's at work, at home, whether it's in faith places, wherever, because you see so much, people on their own in silos. I'd like to see our society where people are really in those communities working and living and playing together across generations, really.
Yeah, sounds cool. I won't avoid it. We're talking about voluntary, community and social enterprise. I think my dream for that would be is representation for everyone in their community, but also that we can also increase diversity in community. So it goes in the circle, if you know what I mean, that we can just all come together, and as everyone has said, that we can do ourselves out of a job, really, that it's just, this just isn't an uncomfortable conversation anymore. It just reflects what our community is, and everyone can all work together. Our time is gone. Everyone, thank you so much for joining us. So what an incredibly interesting episode today. Really, 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 really key with what we've gone through with the pandemic and this next stage. What is this next stage? Around community has been so much more important for everyone, and has lifted it. So this is really, really interesting, really important to address racism in our voluntary sectors and in charities and social enterprise. See you next week. This has been a total collaboration between Black FE Leadership Group and FE News. I hope you enjoyed. So I hope you feel inspired. We'll see you again next week.
Thank you, Maddie. Thank you, Kath. Thank you. Thanks, Gavin.
Thanks a lot. Bye.
Bye.